In the heart of modern livestock logistics, there exists a paradox. How do you move something alive, something fragile, sentient, and responsive, as if it were a component in a vast, mobile machine? This is not a metaphor. It's the reality of moving 50,000 sheep across continents. From dry inland routes to oceanic crossings that last days, each animal becomes part of a living system, a biological load that reacts to heat, vibration, stress, and time. Moving a flock of this scale is not herding, it's hydraulics. A dynamic load, like a 2,000-ton excavator arm, pressured by friction points that shift with terrain, temperature, and the instincts of the animals themselves. Think of a bucket wheel excavator carving through rock, a rotating mechanism that must absorb variations in density, resistance, and terrain in real time. That's the engineering logic behind today's livestock convoys. When a mass of sheep moves, pressure builds not in steel joints, but in muscle tension. Resistance comes not from granite, but from heat, thirst, and crowd density. Efficiency is measured not in fuel usage, but in water access, metabolic conservation, and behavioral calm. Just as a mining machine redistributes hydraulic force to maintain rhythm, livestock logistics adjusts feed points, ventilation, and space density to keep the biological system balanced. At the core, the technical challenge isn't the animals. It's the variables they embody. Every sheep is a sensor. Every reaction is data. The logistic puzzle revolves around three unstable components: hydration latency, or how long an animal goes without water; metabolic depletion, or how much energy it burns under transport stress; and density-induced aggression, the chain reaction of fear and physical confrontation that spikes in crowded, overheated environments. These aren't just animal behaviors, they're systemic forces, like pressure surges in hydraulic circuits, that can compromise an entire operation if not anticipated. On export vessels departing from ports like Fremantle in Australia, real-time physiological monitoring has become essential. Heart rate sensors and thermal scans have revealed a critical threshold. After just 4 hours without rotating shade or airflow modulation, average cortisol levels spike by 15%. For an engineer, that's equivalent to a torque shock in an industrial arm, a moment when the system starts to fight itself. It's not theoretical, it's visible. Thermal drone footage taken during maritime transport shows precise hot zones, forming in densely packed clusters of sheep, similar to heat pockets that form in conveyor belts carrying ore through industrial plants. The body heat isn't evenly spread. It concentrates, amplifies, and escalates until the animals can no longer self-regulate. This is the scale we're dealing with. 50,000 sheep don't move like one body. They move like many interconnected circuits. Each reaction echoes through the mass, demanding a response. And yet, this complexity is invisible to most people. We see wool, lamb, leather, but not the orchestration behind it. Not the choreography of airflow, hydration points, anti-slip decks, and behavioral thresholds. Not the invisible mechanics that allow a live cargo convoy to cross oceans and deserts while preserving life, health, and quality. And that's where the real story begins. Behind this biome in motion is an entire world of technology, coordination, and biological engineering. The deck isn't just a surface. The GPS isn't just a dot. And the flock isn't static. It's an adaptive, metabolic engine, moving forward. Let's open the deck and look closer. On a livestock ship, the deck is not just the ground underfoot. It's a fluctuating microenvironment that responds, and sometimes reacts violently, to conditions far beyond the eye. Every 3 hours, its thermal profile shifts. The sun's angle changes, casting new shadows and concentrating heat. The ammonia level builds in the air from accumulated waste. Body heat intensifies as thousands of animals exhale, compress, and jostle within limited square meters. From above, it may look stable, but below, a complex thermal and chemical loop is forming, one that affects everything from heart rate to breathing patterns, rest behavior, and immune function. When that system isn't managed properly, stress compounds silently. Studies across long-haul sheep transports have shown that this loop, heat, ammonia, pressure, leads to uneven rest cycles. Not just discomfort, but chronic fatigue in up to 40% of the animals. Sheep that can't find stable footing, others that never reach a cool zone. The deck becomes a heat sink, a pressure plate, a biological amplifier, and the longer the voyage, the more the imbalance grows. In logistics terms, the platform ceases to be passive and begins to actively deteriorate animal condition. But this is where engineering begins to intervene, not with brute force, but with smart sensing. Some transport vessels now operate with sensor-integrated decking, rubberized, anti-slip surfaces, embedded with real-time ammonia detectors and microclimate monitors. These sensors do more than alert, they trigger direct responses from the ship's ventilation and misting systems. When temperature or chemical thresholds rise in a specific zone, airflow is increased, droplets activated, or shade mechanisms adjusted. It's not a ship reacting to a problem. It's a system anticipating one, with millisecond precision. Field studies comparing sensor-activated environments to manually adjusted ones are already showing measurable results. In New Zealand, 2 similar sheep convoys were monitored, one with real-time sensor feedback, one without. The flock under automated environmental management lost 23% less live weight during the journey. Less stress, better metabolic stability, improved tissue quality. These aren't just abstract gains. They're visible in the condition of the wool, in the consistency of movement, in the data from on-deck monitoring logs. One vessel, retrofitted in Uruguay with this platform, sailed to Saudi Arabia during the 2022 high-temperature window. Conditions peaked above 40 degrees Celsius. Yet the outcome was clear: a 38% drop in animal fatalities compared to previous voyages. Same ship, same number of animals. The only variable that changed was the intelligence of the floor, because if the deck can think, the system can breathe. This shift in perspective matters. To treat the floor as neutral is to ignore the physical truth of moving thousands of warm-blooded organisms in a sealed environment. Every hoof, every exhale, every stress signal becomes part of a feedback loop. If that loop is passive, it spirals. If it's active, if it senses and adjusts, it protects. Which brings us to a principle worth repeating. If your deck doesn't sense the load as a living circuit, it's not a livestock platform. It's a stress multiplier. And in long-haul maritime transport, that difference can be measured in lives. In open desert landscapes, the horizon can stretch for kilometers. Flat, dry, and seemingly predictable. But for a convoy moving 10,000 sheep across this terrain, visibility is an illusion. The sun distorts the ground with convective heat waves. Dust clouds rise without warning, carried by wind or kicked up by movement. And the GPS pin, stable and precise on a map, fails to tell the full story. It doesn't show what the animals see. It doesn't feel the heat pulsing through the ground or detect the subtle change in flock behavior when cohesion begins to break down. And it certainly doesn't know when the front of the herd is moving while the back is collapsing under dehydration. Traditional livestock convoy coordination assumes a linear logic, a start point, a destination, a set pace, a fixed path. But biology doesn't follow maps. A desert route planned for efficiency can unravel if the animals overheat, if the ground becomes too coarse, or if a dust storm throws off orientation. Disorientation isn't just visual, it's behavioral. Sheep veer, cluster, or freeze. The group begins to fracture, and every split increases risk of injury, of exhaustion, of death. This is where hybrid guidance systems are starting to transform the equation. Instead of relying solely on satellite GPS, new operations integrate thermal satellite overlays and drone-based shepherd units. The thermal imagery reveals micro-hotspots on the terrain hours before the flock arrives. It maps zones of reflective heat, identifies stress corridors, and allows convoys to adapt before physiological breakdown begins. Meanwhile, Drones fly just above the group, not to push or direct with sound, but to observe, identifying dispersion patterns, locating outlier clusters, and relaying behavior in real time to logistic algorithms. The surprising result: speed decreases, but integrity increases. In comparative field trials, convoys guided with this hybrid method took 17% longer to reach their destinations. But stress indicators, including respiration rate, hydration loss, and post-transport recovery time, improved dramatically. Reproductive health, tracked in the weeks following arrival, rose by 19%. When the animals arrived, they were metabolically intact. They weren't just delivered, they were preserved. One operation in Saudi Arabia tested this approach along a series of dune-traversing routes. The landscape was brutal, shifting terrain, midday temperatures over 45 degrees Celsius. The integration of drone guidance and thermal route mapping didn't accelerate the journey, but it halved dehydration-related losses. Not because the path was shorter, but because the decisions were smarter. Cooling zones were anticipated. Shade pauses were pre-planned. The convoy became a moving biosystem with route logic designed for biology, not just geography. This is a fundamental shift in how we define efficiency. It's not about arrival time. It's not about minimizing distance. It's about maintaining the organism's internal balance: water, heat, cohesion, calm. Precision in herd logistics isn't about getting there faster, it's about getting there metabolically intact. Because in extreme climates, the greatest cost isn't fuel. It's life lost to silence, to heat, to time ignored. And every sensor, every drone, every thermal line on the map helps rewrite that cost. One step at a time, across the dust. In traditional livestock management, sheep were seen as a group to be moved, controlled, and maintained, a static unit, reactive and dependent. But this view no longer holds. In modern agrologistics, especially on the scale of tens of thousands of animals, the flock has evolved into something much more complex. It is now managed as a dynamic biome, a living, distributed system of biological nodes, each carrying data, behavior, and metabolic demands. The shift isn't just semantic, it's operational. It transforms how decisions are made, how routes are defined, and how the animals interact with the environments they move through. This systemic shift borrows its logic from the most advanced branches of precision agriculture. Consider how an irrigation pivot adjusts its flow based on evapotranspiration rates and soil conductivity, or how a variable rate fertilizer map calibrates nutrient delivery down to the square meter. Now apply that same logic to mobile biology. In this model, sheep are no longer passive recipients of care. They are programmable metabolic units, each influenced by climate, stress thresholds, feed rhythm, and internal biochemistry. And they are managed not only by humans, but by systems. Systems that integrate GPS data, biometric feedback, environmental sensors, and pre-programmed behavioral responses. One of the most sophisticated examples of this thinking in practice is unfolding in Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. There, a pioneering project implemented geo-fenced digital paddocks across a large-scale rotational grazing area. Over 5,000 sheep were outfitted with RFID collars and monitored via satellite-linked control hubs. The landscape was digitally segmented into zones, not by physical barriers but by access logic. An RFID gate would only open if 3 conditions were met. The zone ahead had adequate forage availability, the temperature fell within a predefined comfort window, and the animals had achieved sufficient rest. If any of these metrics failed, the system held the flock in place or rerouted it to a more optimal patch. The results were not theoretical, they were measurable. Within one season, the wool quality index rose by 22%, driven by reduced stress and better nutritional cycling. Disease occurrence during movement, especially hoof-related infections and respiratory flare-ups, dropped by 35%. Perhaps most notably, movement efficiency was redefined, not in speed or kilometers covered, but in biological integrity per kilometer. The animals didn't just reach their destination. They arrived physiologically stronger, with better coat density, more stable body mass, and improved post-movement recovery rates. This is what it means to turn a convoy into a biome. The system sees the animals not only as bodies in space, but as processors of energy, water, and behavioral feedback. It anticipates rather than reacts. It guides without coercing. The journey becomes an orchestrated sequence of metabolic events optimized for health, yield, and long-term sustainability. Because in this paradigm, movement is no longer a simple act of relocation. It is a strategic operation, akin to managing a distributed energy grid or a precision logistics network. If your sheep walk without logic, they degrade. But if they move in sync with environment, nutrition, and internal rhythm, they scale, not just in numbers, but in resilience. In this kind of agriculture, success is not in how fast you move, but in how well you arrive. Comment 1 if this changed how you see a sheep convoy.